these are no longer enough anymore, that you need to also bring in some analytical skills, some technology skills into the equation because the world has changed. So I wanted to show the picture of the guy. So how this started was back in November. There was a visiting professor from the University of California, Irvine. His name is Vijay Gurbaxani, and he gave an excellent presentation about how software is changing the world. And he is the head of the Digital Transformation Center at the Paul Merage Business School. And his basic takeaway was, software is every company's core asset. And he gave a number of examples of companies of this. One of them was GE, and one of them was Uber. And I was like, software is every company's core asset? How can that possibly be true? And here he put up Uber. It's an app. OK, software is their core asset. I get it. And then he put up GE, and I was like, how can that possibly be true? And he went on, and he talked about these companies quite a bit. And he's absolutely right. Software is a core asset to these companies. And when he says software, he's talking about data. He's talking about analytics. He's talking about predicting things. He's talking about optimizing. And he's talking about a strategic core asset. So now I want to give you some examples. When I say a strategic core asset, I want to give you some examples of what I'm not talking about. I'm going to talk about Thomson Reuters here for a minute, and we can keep all of this between you and me, right? OK. If you go to some Thomson Reuters executives and you ask them, is software, digital analytics, is that a strategic core asset to Thomson Reuters today? They will tell you yes. Yes, of course it is a strategic core asset of Thomson Reuters today. We have marketing analytics that will predict when our customers are going to lapse on our products. We do social network analytics. When somebody calls into our customer center, we provide them data about that customer. I get a dashboard, this deck, this thick, full of dashboards every week. Of course it is a strategic core asset of our company. That is not what I am talking about. I am talking about not also doing. Yes, we also have prediction models. Yes, we're also putting up customer data to our customer reps. I'm not talking about also doings. I'm talking about a strategic core asset. The second example of what I am not talking about is you will often hear a futurist come into a stage like this and say something like, yes, we will all be in flying cars. Unless you know the technology that's going to get you into those flying cars, that's not a strategy. You've just told me a story. That is it. So it can't be an also doing, and you need to have a plan. The last story I'm going to tell you for what I'm not talking about, I started in the marketing analytics team about 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the guys that was working in the team at the time, he was very new. He doesn't really have a quantitative background. He was new to the group. He had worked there for a while. And he pulled me aside, and he said, Rebecca, the dirty little secret of marketing analytics or of analytics, the analytics aren't really that hard. And I thought, that's interesting. I'm going to take that under advisement. He was wrong. Certainly there are analytics you can do that aren't that hard, and yes, they're sometimes very beneficial and they're very helpful. But when I am talking about a strategic core asset, I'm talking about something that is a core asset. It's not an also doing. You have a plan of how you're going to get there, and it's actually going to be pretty hard. I'll just keep moving on through. So now I feel like I can move over here so I won't be in anyone's way. So when Vijay Gurbaxani gave this great talk at Carlson back in November, 2 of the companies he talked about were GE and Uber. And so I sort of thought about this again. I'm like, I could think, now I have a strategy background, I'm like, I could imagine a framework where Uber and GE are on exactly opposite ends of this framework. And so I did have a framework that I could put Uber and GE on exactly opposite ends. So if you think of a 2x2, Along the bottom is sort of the legacy. So how old is your company, right? Uber is very new. GE is very old. So you have Uber on one end, GE on the other end. And then if you think about sort of tangible assets, right? Are you producing goods? Oh, yay. There's Vijay Gurbaxani. Please note I did have his picture up there. You can go back one, actually. OK. Oh, perfect. And then do you have a little? Oh, God. Yeah. That's all right. Can I just tell you when to do the slides? Would that be OK?
Yeah, the world's not flat, right?
Oh, now what happened? We lost it again.
No, did it go off again?
All right. I don't know if you briefly saw that framework while it was up there. So on one side, right, for legacy, we have new companies and we have old companies. And then you look at, are they producing goods or are they producing services, right? And so if you're good, you're on the bottom, goods. And if you're producing services, you're on top. Now, if it comes back up, and you'll see it'll be populated with a number of companies. It's actually quantitative, what I put in there. So along the legacy, right, is just sort of a ranked order of when they started. And then along the goods and services is actually sort of a derivative of a return on assets, right? So how much revenue are you making based on your plant, property, and equipment, your inventory, right? So do you need sort of heavy things? Are you producing heavy things to make your revenue? And so in this 2x2, you can imagine you can populate it with a number of companies, right? And you'll have some new companies like Uber that are new, and they produce mainly a service. They have very little plant property and equipment, very little inventory, right? And then still, in new, you can imagine there are companies up there such as Tesla, such as, there you go, perfect. OK. Along the bottom is old to new, right? Oh, thank you very much. And then we have goods and services, right? And so you can see Uber and GE are up there. And then you can populate it with a number of other companies. One of the things so the reason why I could get Uber up there is because they had some leaked documents from about a year ago, and so I could sort of extrapolate them. They will probably move much higher after they get out of their startup costs. You can see I put Hilton down there because I really wanted to show Airbnb up here, but they haven't had any leaked documents yet, so I was out of luck in that case. And certainly companies have been evolving since the days of Cornelius Vanderbilt, right? Look at IBM. They used to produce mainframe computers the size of this auditorium, right? They would certainly be down in the old and the goods corner. And now they've reinvented themselves with cognitive computing. And they have Watson, and it's a service, right? And they've moved on up. Thomson Reuters used to produce books. And now, by our own definition, we are a technology company, right? And we have moved on up. So people can move around in this framework. But I just wanted to use this to sort of set the stage of, can every company have software data analytics as their core asset? And so what we are going to do, here it is, OK. We're going to take a look at 4 different companies here and sort of go through like a quick case study for how much time we have of whether they have used software, data, and analytics as a strategic core asset of this company. So to do this, we are going to use the very basic strategy framework of Michael Porter's 5 forces. If you went to business school, you know what this is. It is very helpful if you are interviewing with McKinsey, Bain, what have you. But it also does a very good job of sort of showing what the marketplace is, and sort of what you want to do is look at who's in control, who has the power. And so this got started. Michael Porter was a Harvard Business School professor in 1979. And this was the framework that he came up with, again, to just sort of look at markets and industries. And we're going to use this today as sort of a quick framework to sort of think through each of these 4 different businesses. In the center, you see the rivalry box, right? So who's in the market today? Is it fragmented? Are there 1 or 2 people that sort of dominate? And then you go over to suppliers. So who are the suppliers to these companies? Who are their customers? And then you look up at new entrants, right? So are there ankle biters that you need to be aware of? And then you look at substitutes, right? So where else could people be spending their money? Okay, so let's start with Uber. Here we go. So for Uber, we're just going to look at the taxi industry, right? And so in 2008, the US taxi industry was a $10 billion industry. What's the valuation of Uber today? It's $65, $70 billion. Now that's global, right? But in just the US 7 years ago, 8 years ago, it was $10 billion, and nobody really thought much more of it. So what you used to see in sort of this taxi, get yourself around the city industry, right, was you had these very local cab companies. There weren't a lot of economies of scale. You don't see a national cab company, right? What you learned in one city, they didn't think was very helpful to help you exceed or achieve in another city, right? And there are many regulations because of that. And it's a very regulated industry, right? It's how much you can charge, and you have to have the medallion, and we'll get to that. Suppliers are really your drivers, right? No, not a lot there. Here we go. Customers, right? I think if you had asked the cab companies, particularly back in maybe 2007, they would have said, I kind of know where my customers are going to be, but mostly it's sort of unpredictable, sort of lumpy neediness. So they looked at the customers, and the customer expectations are changing. I'm gonna blow this right now. All customers look the same on every one of these industries we're going to look at, right? People have been Google-fied. They expect more. They want to be able to use their phone. They have higher expectations. They want to know more. So you'll see that for everyone. Now, of course, we've all heard the stories about the medallions, right? So you had to have these medallions. And this is how cities got sort of licensed people for hailing, right? So if you wanted to hail a cab, that cab needed to have a medallion, right? And they used to cost $1 million because they were so valuable. And now they cost like $50,000, right? Because the market has really eroded for them. So it was very hard to be a new entrant in this market. And then finally, for substitutes, of course, you could take your bike, you could take your bus, you could walk. Okay. So in 2008, Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp, now these guys have computer and software engineering backgrounds. They looked at this market, and the gig economy, the share economy, was already well underway at that time, right? And they came to this market, and they looked at it, and they were like, well, this whole thing that's going on now with the Uber drivers and whether they're contractors or employees, excuse me, that has been going on for a very long time. This is nothing new with Uber. There have been lawsuits for years with the old school industry cab companies about whether they're contractors or employers. I mean, Uber looked at it like any cab company and said contractors, definitely contractors, right? How they got around the medallion was you weren't hailing, right? You were using your app to reserve a ride from a friend that you haven't met yet, but you're going to soon rate, right? And so that's how they got around it, and they recognized, right, that customers were frustrated. You know, I lived in San Francisco in the late 90s, and if you tried to get a cab, you'd want to pull your hair out. All these tricks about where to stand and whatnot to get a cab, right? So I'm sure they came to it with the same perceptions. They were very frustrated, and they looked at this diagram, right, and they said, this is a data problem. And so that's what they did, right? They started gathering data, they analyzed it, and then they leveraged it. And they haven't been shy about this, right? They tell the drivers where they should be, right, if they want to get picked up. They will introduce new products, right, like Uber Pool, because they know where you're getting picked up, which route you're going, where you're being dropped off, and they know that a lot of people, like think Manhattan at 5 p.m., a lot of people are going to Brooklyn, right? And they figured this out, and they realized that they could use data to help them optimize this. Okay, Uber, it's an app. They use data. It's a strategic core asset. Yes, of course. Okay, so let's move on to someone where it's a little bit more difficult. Let's talk about Tesla and electric cars, right? Very tangible. So when they came and looked at this industry, right, you have some major car companies in there. They're very beholden. Do you think the gas company is going to let these companies go out of business? There are high exit barriers. With all the troubles that Volkswagen has had, do you think Germany is going to let Volkswagen go out of business? these guys are here, right? And they have very strong share, right? They know their markets. Suppliers. What we have here is sort of the rise of the mega suppliers, right? And so when car companies have a number of suppliers that they will work with, they're also very large, but all the power is still held with the car companies. If this supplier won't give them the volume and the price that they want, there is another third world country with resources that will do it, right? Come to customers again, right? Customers have some brand loyalty. The purchasing is sort of cyclical. They need financing. And again, higher expectations. New entrants, capital intensive, right? You want to build cars, you need a lot of capital, and you need a lot of machines to do it. And then finally, substitutes, bikes, buses, and Uber, of course. Okay. Elon Musk has a PhD in applied physics. And yes, he wanted to use a new technology. Yes, he wanted to do electric cars. But he, again, looked at this problem and said, this is fundamentally a data problem, right? And he sort of looked around and he said, well, there's a lot more we can squeeze out of suppliers. People are still going to be buying cars. You know, there's some automation we can do, right, to sort of cut down on the costs of how much money we have to put in. But what they did is they looked at it and they said, this is a data problem. And similar to the taxi industry, right, those cab companies that are out there today, they could have gathered the same data that Uber is doing too. And they could have analyzed it and leveraged it, just like Uber, but they didn't. And we see the same thing here, and this is what Tesla did. They said, this is a data problem, right? So they changed the entire paradigm of how you think about the car that you're going to buy, right? So common sense would tell you, you buy a car, you drive it off the lot, right? It loses thousands of dollars the minute you get off the lot. Tesla has said, no, we are going to make that car more efficient, go faster, and more feature-rich 3 years later after you have bought it, so it's actually going to be worth more than what you paid for it when you drove it off the lot, right? And how they do this, right, is the Internet of Things, they have sensors everywhere in the car, they download that information, they analyze it, and then they leverage it for a better customer experience. And these guys, Toyota, Volkswagen, GM, they could have done it too. They didn't. And here's another example. Does anybody remember Fisker? They came out with electric cars at about the same time out of California. They started producing electric cars and selling them in 2008. Fisker went out of business. Tesla's actually doing pretty well, right? A couple of years ago, the New York Times reviewer gave a very bad review to Tesla. He drove the car from Washington, D.C. to Boston and just tore it to shreds and said he had to turn off the heat to get there and all these problems with it. Like the very next day, Tesla came out with reams of data saying, that can't possibly be true. Like, I'm sure it was a fire drill on Tesla's side, right? But it's not like they were taking weeks to gather the data and look at it and get a response. Like the very next day, they were like, nope, this cannot be true, and let me show you the data, right? So Tesla, leveraging data. Okay, checking the time. So now we've talked about new companies, right? It's easy. Software, data analytics as a core strategic asset. These guys are new. Of course they can do it. What are you talking about? Let's talk about GE. It's not a lot older than GE. GE started in 1892, right? They produce jet engines, trains, healthcare mammography machines, right? So GE. Right now they compete against the likes of Honeywell and Siemens, right? And there are a lot of players in this big industrial market. They have sort of the same thing where they really hold a lot of the power with the suppliers. Customers, again, a lot of government customers, and so security is really important. So now you have people that have been Googleized, but also really, really, really care about security, which may not have been quite as true in the other two markets that we looked at. New entrants, very patent heavy, so it's a little hard to get in. The Internet of Things, there are already a lot of startups. They were starting to look at this Internet of Things. And then finally, substitutes sort of driving consumer demand had a lot to do with regulation or, you know, do I want to buy a greener car or go on a greener train, those type of things. Okay. In 2011, Emmelt who has, so he looked at this market, and he realized that GE was going to be just a commodity producer, right? A commodity producer of things. And so he sort of looked at suppliers, and he said, again, we sort of hold the leverage, but our customers expect more. We have plenty of lobbyists out there doing as best as they can with the substitutes. We probably don't need to dump too much more money into that, right? So they sort of looked at, what are new entrants doing? You know what new entrants were doing? They were gathering data. They were analyzing it. They were leveraging it. And they said, we can do that too. And he wasn't just sort of half kind of doing it. In 2011, they came out and invested $1 billion in GE software. And in this year, they have 25 products that are now all linked up to what they call the Internet of Things. They really focused on the customer experience for this. What they've done is they've built this platform called Predix, right? You've probably seen the commercials, right, with the software engineer. It was just on NPR this morning. The software engineer, right, and they put down the big hammer and like, can you lift the hammer, right? This goes all to their Predix software. And so what they are doing, right, is they are putting sensors in their products. They are taking that data, they are analyzing it, and they are leveraging it, right? Honeywell, they have smart buildings. They've made a little investment in it. Siemens is using SAP to build an Internet of Things. Just last March, IBM said that they were going to invest $3 billion, so 3 times what GE initially invested, because they were going to build an Internet of Things platform, right? So again, all these companies could have done it, but GE has made a really big bet on it, and they've done it right. They've made it an open platform so that other people can build apps on it. And what this allows is it produces like 1% efficiency for customers who use their products. If you are Delta and you are flying planes and you have a 1% efficiency on the gas that you use in your planes, that's big money at the end of the day, right? They can predict when you need to do the maintenance on these airplanes. They can predict to the train engineers while they are driving that you have a certain velocity, a certain speed going up this hill. When can you let go and just coast over the hill? These are the type of things that their customers love, right? Because now they're saving money, and they can build the exact apps that they want. So I don't have a ton of time left. This is Thomson Reuters right here. So basically, our suppliers, right, had to use us as aggregators. They don't anymore. There's an internet. They can reach people that they want. We have lots of ankle biters out there, and our customers expect more. So just to wrap up on Thomson Reuters, so what do we have? We have the world's best professionals as our customer base. We have deep domain expertise as to what they are trying to do. And we can take the information that we get from our platforms that we have today, and we can predict. So 80% of what these professionals are going to do, we can predict what they're going to do next, and we can help them do that, and we can serve them up with the content, the tools, the technology that they need to do that. They also need communities, and so we are building communities so that they can work with people to get their jobs done. And then finally, that last 20% of what people do is the spark. That's what makes their job unique. And so we are giving them the tools to get that spark. So I'm going to wrap it up there. We have 2 minutes. Oh, this is the only last one right here. So all I'm saying, software, data, analytics needs to be a strategic core asset for every company. And the frameworks, somebody mentioned earlier, right, that you need to have a Venn diagram in every presentation. I was like, yes. So the frameworks that we're using today in strategy are not enough. We need the skills of like the people in this room that are going to help develop the strategy, because you need to have an understanding of the technology stack. You need to have an understanding of models and what is possible. You need to have an understanding of, actually, it takes a long time to clean up this data, so we're going to have to, you need to have this type of understanding of the whole process that's underneath, because you need to have a plan. And so that is it. I apologize for the problems we had in the slides at the beginning, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Rebecca.
I think we have about We have 1 minute for questions.
We can run a little bit over here. I think karma dictates we run over a little bit to make up for the technical difficulties. So, any questions?
All right, well, if you do have any questions, I'm around all afternoon, so please find me.
I have
I'd be
a
happy to. Oh,
I have a question.
sure.
How do you get the strategy people in the same room with the data people?
So this is where it gets really difficult. And somebody asked me yesterday, which comes first, right? Do you train your strategy people to have this deep data analytics, or do you train your analytics people to have the strategy? And I was like, don't ask me that question tomorrow because I don't have an answer. But this gets at it, right? Is how do you get them together? This is why you can't sort of kind of also do it. A company has to decide, this is what we're going to do, and they have to put the resources behind it, like you saw with GE. That's a very old company. They had lots of silos and different bonus structures, I'm sure, all over their whole company that were not dependent on predicts, right? And they said, no, we are going to be left behind in the dust. If we want to succeed in the next decade, in the next 20 years, this is what we must do. And so they did bring those people together. All right, well, I won't keep you from lunch. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rebeccah.